So good evening. My name is Augustin Nicolescu from the Herbert C. Kalman Institute for Interactive Conflict Transformation. And it's my pleasure to warmly welcome you here on this very hot evening here in Vienna, and to thank you for being here. And also to thank the organizations that made this possible, which includes the International Institute for Peace, the Dialogue Bureau Vienna, who are co-organizers of this event. Thank you for your partnership. We are meeting at a hard time and a hard moment all over the world, but here in Europe, across Europe, we're watching full-scale military invasion, the deliberate dismantling of democratic institutions, and for three countries at the center of tonight's conversation, Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, the question of whether ordinary people can still challenge systems of violence is not an academic one. It's a matter of daily survival and basic agency. Tonight's discussion is also anchored in a new book by one of our panelists. The book is entitled "Resistance is Not Futile: Exploring Philosophical and Social Science Theories of Civil Resistance." Its central claim is important to hold on in these difficult times. Ultimate power does not, in the end, come from the barrel of a gun. It rests on cooperation. Rulers depend on obedience of the people they rule, and what people grant, they can also withdraw. This is an idea that runs from La Boétie through Hannah Arendt and Gene Sharp, and explains how unarmed people have, again and again, outlasted and brought down regimes that seemed unassailable. But also, I think what Daniel has written in the book shows that the picture is somewhat darkened. Autocrats have also studied civil resistance, and they have learned to adapt. And that is really why I think it's important that the front line of people on the ground, first-hand testimony, matters more than just theory alone. So it is, first of all, my pleasure to introduce Dr. Daniel Petz, researcher and author based at Gadjah Mada University in Indonesia, and a former colleague of mine going back 20-some years ago in Schleining in Austria, when we studied together. And his new book brings this work together and provides the analytical thread for our conversation. And joining him on the panel are three people who can speak to these questions from the ground. Stepan Rusin is program coordinator at the Transatlantic Dialogue Center. He brings the perspective of Ukrainian civil society, which continues to be an anchor in the national defense and also demanding internal accountability and the challenges that is within the context of war. Also with us is Victoria Andrukovich, coordinator of the Dialogue Bureau Vienna program on Belarus, who brings the perspectives of a movement that persists despite the state's effort to dismantle independent civil society. And Amina Suleymanova, who works at the intersection of civil resistance, community organizing, and social change, and brings a perspective of Russia where anti-war dissent is criminalized and driven underground. I want to leave you with a line from the book itself opens with, from the suffragist Millicent Fawcett: "Courage calls to courage everywhere, and its voice cannot be denied." It's now my pleasure to hand over to our moderator, Dr. Hannes Svoboda, President of the International Institute for Peace, to lead the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Augustine, thank you very much for your introduction to the debate. I'm very happy about that. As you mentioned, we have the book of Daniel Petz, just to show it. You can have it, it's outside, and the author will also be ready to sign it. Maybe, Daniel, we begin in asking you, why did you write the book about resistance? And is it not futile? Are you sure it's not futile? So please, maybe some remarks from your side.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. As Augustine said, now we're living in quite dark times. If you watch the news, there's war, there's genocide, there's climate change, there's autocratization, and so on. So yeah, one reason for writing the book was to show a little bit of hope and say, actually, although things might be dire at the moment, without civil resistance, things would be much worse on this planet. No? A lot of things that we are used to, such as universal suffrage, particularly also for women, the end to slavery, a lot of like social health insurance, pensions, and so on. They would probably not have happened or not have happened that early without people standing up for their rights, with people kind of using methods of civil resistance. So yeah, I think it's an important reminder for that. So I very strongly believe that resistance is not futile.
Emine, resistance in Russia, how do you see it today? You said in the discussion we had before you have some sort of Russian mindset also, partly, of course. Some people said the Russian mindset is believing in authorities, following authorities, maybe not applauding, but just accepting it, resignation. But I think you are not a person of resignation, you're a person of resistance. So how do you see it in general and for you personally?
Is it? Yeah, it's working. Well, at first, as you can see from my name, I'm not a Russian person. I'm Crimean Tatar, who was born in Komi Republic. It's a republic in the very north of Russia. It's Arctic Circle. And I was born there because my grandfather was deported by Soviet Union because he was Crimean Tatar and it was genocide. So I was born and raised with all those things inside me, knowing that I'm Crimean Tatar, who was genocided by Russian state, and still I have Russian citizenship and I live there and I have friends. My family is partly Russian. So it's, I think it's hard to understand if you did not raise, if you haven't experienced it. Because it's just hard. You need to go through this to understand. I don't see Russia as a whole at all, because Russia is very different. Every region is different, and we have like all religions, a lot of nationalities, hundreds of languages, and I don't know. I never thought of Russia as something one. I always think about it locally, local points.
But aren't the Russian authorities saying we have to keep, because of the variety of people with different languages, together by an authoritarian rule? That's the only way to keep Russia, Russia?
No, I don't think so. I think it could be a federal state. Actually, it's Russian Federation, but it's only on paper. Yeah, I think it's possible. It's possible because, as I said, part of my family is Russian, so I understand how to mix those identities together. But we need to have respect for each other. And right now, Russian state, what is doing? It's trying to dominate. It's trying to destroy its neighbors. It's trying to destroy even their own people. Because a lot of indigenous languages, they are endangered. Indigenous people, they disappear. A lot of indigenous people go to war to Ukraine because they live in the regions which are economically poor. But they are like this because we have this metropolis, Moscow, which receives all the resources from all the regions and then distributes it. if every region will have their own, I don't know, parliament, their own, if they will let people rule on the places they live, I think it's possible for Russia to keep itself like Russia, but not like now.
Well, we have many other questions, but first let's go to Victoria. What about Belarus? How do you see it? Is it, and how do you see the resistance? Is it against the regime, the government in Belarus? Is it also against Russia, or maybe also, as we had just heard, Emine, how do you see the internal domestic development in your country in connection to the regime or the government or the rules in Moscow and Russia? How is it different? How is it similar? How is it influenced? How do you perceive the authorities in Belarus as representatives of Russia or of its own people, or in a mixture?
Definitely. Thank you so much for the question. Definitely not representative of its own people. I don't think anybody thinks that right now that Lukashenko actually represents Belarusians. And 2020 proves that. Well, regarding civic resistance in Belarus, so it's definitely both. We are fighting the regime of Lukashenko for years, as well as we are fighting already for centuries, I would say, starting from the Russian Empire, USSR, and now contemporary Russia. We are fighting, Russian regime either. There is a level of soft occupation. I think for Moscow it's definitely very convenient to still keep Belarus de jure independent state. De facto, of course, like the economy, the military are so integrated that it's hard to believe that, that Belarus is independent anymore. What I would say that now, I think if before this soft occupation was mostly by suppression of Belarusian culture, suppression of Belarusian identity, and replacing it with Russian, then now it's heavy militarization. It's dragging Belarus into war, both economically in terms of like factories and industries works for Russia, as well as trying to spread this pro-war narratives in schools, in its education. There are patriotic classes, mandatory patriotic classes in Belarusian schools, as well as boys have to go through the military training, like even the small ones, teenagers. There is this Wagner museums, which is crazy in schools. So yeah, it's getting much worse, and civic resistance, as actually we had internal conversation with Emine, that it's not just protest, right? We don't see protest right now in Belarus. Civic resistance is deeper than that. It comes from like the depths of the society. It comes from the small groups and communities that are formed and then support each other, and they are still connected. So you would not see probably civic resistance in Belarus, but it does exist. It does exist on the social level, through communities, when people connect, when people fight, at least for their local issues. They go together. Maybe the issues are not that political, but it is pretty political for them, like ecology, infrastructure, trying to lobby things on the local level and more. And I think this is something that we need to support and don't let people to feel abandoned, because right now everybody focusing on the structures in exile and resisting in exile, and people inside, they're still fighting there. Another side of civic resistance in Belarus is anti-war movement, which is both in terms of some practical partisan activities, like, for example, there was explosion of the A-50 military aircraft in Machulishi, or some railway wars and railway partisan. It happened a while ago. Now, of course, it's very hard to imagine that because it's extremely dangerous for people. But people are still trying to fight undercover. And the other thing is cultural resistance. It's resistance through speaking Belarusian, through Belarusian culture in events. This is a way to say no to war and say no to Russia for Belarusians right now inside the country.
Some people would say if there would be Lukashenko, there would be somebody who would be more Russian oriented and listening to Putin. Because Lukashenko, from time to time, he gave some, interviews. Now also he apologized even to Ukraine in some way. We come to you, then, Stefan. So how would you say, is he in some elements a fighter for independence, or is it, can you not agree with those who say, well, at least Lukashenko is saving the independence of Belarus?
Well, if he's saving independence, he's saving his own independence as a dictator within the country. So he doesn't care much, I think, about the people and the independence of the country, but he does care to stay in power and be the sole ruler of Belarus as an independent state. Yes, I would say he's definitely not interested to Belarus becoming one of the republics or parts of the federation, because it's much more interesting, nice for him to be president forever, of one independent country.
Okay, thank you. So Ukraine was already mentioned, Stepan. When we speak about resistance, then we would primarily speak about the resistance of Ukrainians against the Russian invasion and the Russian army. Yeah, and but is there also resistance necessary against, for example, corruption in Ukraine or other elements, maybe some inclination to have an authoritarian ruler, what of course in wars is always easy to say, well, I have to decide because we cannot have democracy, we cannot have elections. So how do you see resistance? What kind of resistance do you find in Ukraine?
I guess since the time when Ukraine regained its independence, civil resistance was mostly linked to trying the government, trying to prevent the government from doing the policies that people don't like. Like in 2004, it was the forged elections that the people did not like. In 2014 was the very sudden change of the foreign policy vector by then President Yanukovych. And Ukrainian society over this time managed to keep the Ukrainian authorities accountable. And I think now Zelensky, he knows very well that if he's going to do something unpopular, there will be a backlash. And we saw it very vividly last year in July when the Ukrainian parliament passed the law that stripped the independence of the Ukrainian anti-corruption bodies. And immediately, the same day, there were people near the office of the president protesting. Although it's formally prohibited by the martial law, but on the one side, people did not care. On the other side, the Ukrainian authorities understood that you better not go against your societies, and they also did not use the authorities they could use to stop those protests. So I guess in Ukraine, that's maybe a kind of success story of civil resistance, that society got to the point where the government feels accountable. On the other side, if we talk about trends to authoritarianism, for sure, there is a centralization of power in Ukraine related to war. And as long as Ukrainian society shares the goals with the Ukrainian authorities, and the goal is to protect Ukrainian sovereignty and independence, I don't think there will be resistance to the authorities. And so far, if we take a look at the polls, like Zelensky was quite unpopular already at the end of 2021. Like he had maybe 30% of approval rate, which after the start of the full-scale invasion skyrocketed to 95 or something. Now it's around 60, 65, which still shows that the majority of the population in Ukraine supports what the government is doing. And I guess also the government feels Zelensky personally, he is a very big fan of sociological surveys, and he often tries to take a look what's happening inside of the society. And I guess it also means that the government looks to even when, for example, now we have a discussion on the reform of the mobilization in Ukraine. Zelensky and the Minister of Defense, they understand that it's a very sensitive issue, and that's something that can trigger civil resistance if it's not done properly. And it also motivates them to find some solutions that will be accepted by the majority of population. And I guess that's maybe the biggest positive outcome of all of the Ukraine's modern history, that this accountability mechanism exists.
I don't know, you cannot look into the mindset of Zelensky, but was he not aware of the sensitivity of some of the issues, also corruption in its immediate surrounding and environment? Or is he more of the opinion, I am the leader, this is a war, and I have to decide, and if I look beyond what is happening in my immediate neighborhood, whatever, I have to be a strong leader and I cannot tolerate some sort of criticism only if he is forced to. What is his mindset on the non-military fight against Russia?
Also, as you said, it's difficult to look into the head of Zelensky. I guess his work as a president throughout these 4 years is mostly diplomatic. Like, he travels around the world and tries to gather support for the Ukrainian armed forces and Ukraine in general. And for that, he needs to communicate this image of a strong leader that's supported by his people. And that's also very important now with the new American president, that's favoring people whom he believes are strong. And I guess whatever his personal views are, he has to play this role, him being also a former actor. And I think when it goes to the integrity of institutions and anti-corruption, Ukraine, despite the war over the 4 years, there was progress in that direction as well. And it's indispensable for our path to become a member of the EU in the future. And that cannot be put in question by Zelensky or anyone else who will be the leader of Ukraine. And I guess, of course, this centralization means that sometimes you can use not most legally pure methods to achieve your goal, just because the war does not wait. So if you have to move fast, sometimes it requires not, I would say, questionable actions. And what we saw, like, for example, with the anti-corruption law change, he was ready to do this, but on the other way, because of this civil resistance, it took 7 days when it was reverted.
Daniel, very often we speak about the giants, the big leaders of resistance, who can draw, because of their popularity, strong support. We speak about Mandela or Gandhi or others also in Europe. How important are these leaders? And then may I ask also the other colleagues how important they would see the leader or leaderless of resistance. How do you evaluate the importance of such giants?
Okay, yeah, thank you. I think in my book I use giants like in brackets, quotation marks. I think there's two things. Now, if we look at historically at the development of where we are now in terms of civil resistance, there are structural parts and there's the agency parts. And yeah, we had such structural developments just through enlightenment, so people feeling themselves more citizens and not subjects anymore, and development of media and of civil society organizations, women's emancipations, and so on. But definitely there were figures along the way, like Thoreau, Tolstoy, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and then, as you said, mentioned Mandela and so on, that have been immensely important in kind of shaping how we understand civil resistance nowadays, that it is kind of a very distinct form of resistance. No? So there is kind of violent resistance and there is a non-violent civil resistance that follows specific laws, specific tactics and strategies, as opposed to kind of violent military style resistance. So I think this giant's very important, but also within, I mean, Gandhi would not have managed to achieve Indian independence without tens and if not hundreds of thousands of others who supported him, same Martin Luther King Jr. And often, like in these stories, the role of particularly women, like Ella Baker, for example, in the US, are kind of written out a bit of the history books. Yeah, so I think the giants, they need a lot of other people who were willing to kind of put their life, health, liberty at a cost, no, to kind of achieve the successes that we have, like in South Africa or India or in the civil rights movement.
Thank you. Emine, giant in the Russian opposition for the moment, maybe I have a wrong image, there is no giant. There was one who wanted to be a giant, Mr. Navalny. I don't know if he would have become a giant. He was also a controversial figure, but of course, all giants are also controversial, but we come later maybe to how it was seen in Ukraine. So how do you see the situation and how would you evaluate the role Alexei Navalny played in the past when he was still alive?
Well, it's hard to judge, and I'm afraid to do this because there are a lot of discussions in Russian civil society about the role of Navalny, and especially, like you said, controversial figure because I wasn't his supporter. Because he acknowledged that Crimea could be Russian, and well, that's no go for me. And I had okay, it's not the point about giants. I am a person about distributed leadership. I don't like this idea of giants. Giants inspire resistance, but it is the community which sustain it. And in the case of Navalny, he made this huge network of regional resistance places, and I think he made a mistake by using his name. He named it after him, and eventually it played against him. Because just in one day, they closed everything. They made them like terrorists and put people in jail. I think the smart move could be to rebrand this kind of resistance spots, and maybe they survived this way. But right now they lost, and it's a huge loss of capacities of people. So yeah, I'm not about giants, but the figure of Navalny is still huge, and he inspired a lot of people in Russia, and I'm thankful for that.
Okay. Victoria, there are two ladies who could be called perhaps giants in Belarus. Of course, Tikhanovskaya and Kolesnikova. How do you see that? Some people would say they have a different approach. The one is more in strong opposition. The other one is perhaps more in a dialogue with Lukashenko. So how do you evaluate these two ladies? Are they giants? Are they cooperating? Would it be necessary to have the two, or would you also advise to have a more general resistance movement, not relying on some prominent personalities?
Yeah, thank you so much. I would not evaluate these two ladies, but what I would say that I think the more leaders, symbols, inspiration we have, the better. And it's also about the plurality of views, actually. You know, like, are there too much parliament members? I guess not, right? Because it's like this is how like plurality of views is presented. And I think it's great that we have right now Maria, who finally was released, and she could also speak on behalf of a lot of people that are actually like fighting for their nearest and dearest in prisons. It's a different position, but it's still very important for many. The other things, I really don't like the idea of giants, and I do support Amina and also Daniel position that a person could be just a symbol and an inspiration, but it's not like he or she, they don't form the whole resistance movement, right? Unfortunately, these leaders, they are nothing without hundreds, thousands of people behind their back, right? And I think 2020 also shows that it wasn't about Tikhanovskaya. Nobody was voting for Tikhanovskaya. People were voting against the regime. People were voting for change. She became one and only candidate, but it was always very horizontal resistance. It was definitely not about her personally. It was about upheaval of the whole people, of the whole society against violence, against 30 plus years of the regime, of the violation of their rights, of the fraudulent elections.
Yeah, I will take up this point again, but let's first go to Ukraine. There's another person in the past who somebody would say he was a giant, Bandera. How do you evaluate him as a person? What kind of role does he play still today? And maybe also you can make a comment on the conflict between Poland and Ukraine, which is around the person de facto, even if it's about a middle of order which has been dedicated by Zelensky. Please. Maybe you explain, Kutz, who Bandera is. I don't know if everybody knows about that.
Yeah, so
He was.
Stepan Bandera is considered a leader of Ukrainian nationalist movement in the time before the Second World War and during the Second World War. And in Ukraine, now it's considered that that movement was basically the only one in the times of the Second World War that was fighting for Ukraine's independence against the Third Reich, the Soviet Union, and against the Polish Republic under Pilsudski. And it's part of the creation, I guess, of the new national myth in Ukraine, that we had our fighters for independence, and Bandera was the political leader of that moment. It now comes to the conflict with Poland, where the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists and the Ukrainian Insurgent Army are considered military war criminals for the crimes against civilian population in Volhynia, where there was present the Polish minority. So, giving the overview. And this is the essence of the conflict between Ukraine and Poland now. And this issue became prominent starting from 1990s, when Poland was no longer communist and could take a closer look on the history. And also in Ukraine, that was trying to find its own identity after the fall of the Soviet Union. And still in 1990s, I guess, at that time there was a political momentum to try to find a compromise on that issue. The presidents Kwasniewski and Kuchma, they came up with a formula that both Poles and Ukrainians forgive and ask for forgiveness. Because at that time, during Second World War, it was both sides, the Polish Armia Krajowa, the national army of the Polish Republic, also did retaliatory attacks on the Ukrainian civil population in the same region. So it was both-sided, and the consensus at that time was that we need to give this to historians so that they debate, and political relations between Ukraine and Poland should be built on conciliation. And that ended, I wouldn't say ended, that changed. And currently, the current Polish president and the former Polish government, they put a great emphasis on the historical issues, on also, I guess, partly in the pursuit of building this new Polish identity after all of the time when Poland was under either occupations or under repression. And this vision collides now after 2022, while Ukraine also tries to find its own national myth. And the most recent events with President Zelensky signing the decree that gives the name of the Ukrainian insurgent, the heroes of the Ukrainian insurgent army, to one of Ukrainian military units that are fighting now, triggered the response by the Polish president that he calls back the highest order of merit that was presented to President Zelensky. That's the highest decoration in the Polish system of decorations. And that triggered this mutual steps that almost could have had a bad impact on the Ukraine Recovery Conference that is taking place today in Gdansk. And to sum up, I would say Ukrainians want to build the relations with Poland on the basis of today. And today we share common security threats. We are neighbors anyway, and we will be entangled for the next decades and maybe centuries. And Ukraine's vision is more forward-looking, and it's a big question, like whether in the end we'll be able to also maybe convince the Poles to think the same way, or will be Ukraine forced to rewrite its national myth based on the Polish demands? It's an open question. It's difficult to say.
So, nevertheless, all of you agreed that leaders are not so important. I would like to contest that question, because I think we see many opposition without leaders or resistance movement failing. And I think if you don't have a political leadership or vision, what you want, and expressed by a leader, I doubt it can be successful. As we have seen in many cases, also now in Serbia, for example, we have for years demonstrations, but there is no political leadership, and that, of course, is good for the leader. And I don't think that Putin has killed Navalny as such, because he knew that if Navalny, with all his failures and mistakes, would grow as a leader, it would be dangerous. And I don't think that Ukraine resistance against Russia would be good if, let's say, Poroshenko or somebody else would have been president. So you need some personal. It's for the discussion. Maybe I'm wrong. It's not. I'm totally convinced. But maybe again, Daniel. Of course, leaders need the masses to demonstrate, but maybe the demonstrating or resistant masses need a leader in order to be successful. Or would you deny it?
I think it's really a complex question that has no clear yes or no answer. And I think leaders have certain advantages. Yeah, I mean, they can be inspiring. They can kind of, someone like Gandhi, also very inventive in terms of methodology and tactics. They can have a philosophy that can inspire people to follow, and so on and so on. on the other hand, of course, like Navalny, it's also easy to decapitate a movement that is kind of very person-centric. You can put Mandela into prison for 30 years to Robben Island. No? Might be a backlash again against the regime if they do that, but yeah, there is some dangers, of course, if you have kind of a more centralized leadership. What we see right now, I mean, this Generation C revolutions that we have seen, like Bangladesh, Nepal, also a bit Sri Lanka, Serbia now. So yeah, we see that there has been kind of a growth now of these, some say, I call it rhizomatic movements, like plants that grow under the soil, like ginger, so that's roots, and that kind of loose coalitions of like student movements and civil society organizations. But yeah, in Serbia, I think it's a broader coalition also of a lot of parts of civil society, including football supporters and farmers and so on. And these, I think some of these movements have been quite successful. Serbia, I think, I mean, we'll have to see the elections, and they have been extremely, I think, persistent. No? I think there have been 25,000 demonstrations in the last 1.5 years. Yeah, but as I said, one problem that often is the case, it's easy to, as Naomi Klein has said, the journalist and writer, no is not enough. Yeah, so we can often easily agree that we want this dictator, Lukashenko's or the Putin's or the, we want them gone. But then is the question, what then? And then, as we have seen in Egypt after the Arab Spring, sometimes civil society splinters into different groups because there is no common vision about what society should look like. So I think it's not necessarily need leadership, but I think societies need kind of this vision-making process that goes beyond the kind of, okay, we need these bastards gone, but how do we envision a prosperous, democratic country in the future, and where do we see ourselves in the world, and so on and so on.
Emini, you applauded to the vision.
Yeah.
Tell us your vision about the future Russia.
Actually, I want to tell you not about my vision of future of Russia. I want to ask Stepan a question, because you said that movement without leaders tend to fail. There should be a political power. And Daniel said that vision can be this kind of leader. And as long as I know, Euromaidan was successful, and it hasn't a leader. There was no one leader, no one political power, but there was one clear vision about being a part of Europe, not being a part of, you know what.
So I agree, Euromaidan was based around idea, and the people were like not thinking about a particular leader when they were protesting. But also something that we have to take into account at that time, well, there were people who were organizing, well, the stage where the people could tell the people who at that time were taking part in negotiations with Yanukovych on behalf kind of the people. At that time, those were leaders of parliamentary factions, oppositional factions in Ukrainian parliament, like Klitschko, Yatsenyuk, and I forgot this actually. Like that means that kind of proves your point, because I don't remember. Then basically they were not that important. But in the end, there were people who were in the political process and were kind of representing these people that were protesting. And then after Yanukovych fled, they also stepped in and took kind of the leadership of the institutions that were left without leadership, because a lot of people simply fled Ukraine. So it's, I would say, 50-50. There should, like, it's not a prerequisite that there is one leader that everyone is looking at, but there should be people that, in case the civil resistance is successful, who will be in charge. I would say.
Yeah, thank you for the question, but still I asking for the answer to my question. What's your vision? And that, of course, also Victoria. What is the vision of your personal or your resistance movement? Does it depend on losing the war, at least on stopping the war against Ukraine? That's something you can develop, or how do you see it? What kind of vision do you have about the future of Russia you would like to see, realistically?
Realistically, I think we made a circle back to the beginning because there is no one vision in Russia, and that was my point that I am not an. I wasn't Navalny supporter because I have my different vision of Crimea, and I wasn't agree with him. And Russia is too huge; it's too big, and the vision of Ukraine in 2014 was to be a part of Europe. The vision in 2020 in Belarus was we don't want these people to lead us. We don't want this man to lead us. We want to choose. But I don't see any kind of clear one vision for every region of Russia. There is Caucasus, Far East, and Arctic, and the south of Russia. It's very different places with very different problems.
Yeah, but what is your vision, your personal vision? Besides, you want, I don't know, you want an independent Crimea, you want Crimea to be part of a Russian Federation or a Ukraine Federation. But even apart from that, what kind of society should it be?
My vision is to build trust between little communities. I have a lot of hope for small communities to come together, to have their own strategies, their own vision on the local level. And I want those communities emerge in every region of Russia, in every big city, small town. And then I think they can communicate with each other because they have clear strategies and clear visions, and they can see where they have that one goal they want to reach and go for that goal.
Okay,
But
Belarus.
it's a long process, yeah.
What kind of vision do you have, you personally, or you think should be developed for the Belarus of the future? Maybe it should be a member of European Union, should be democratic, should be capitalistic, or should it be also a federation of small communities? It's interesting. No, it's interesting what you said, because Václav Havel, I was reading, I was in preparation, that he was not, of course he was for Europe, but it was a different kind of Europe. It was against consumer society, it was for more smaller, as you said, also cultural, interested people. So many of these people had not only a vision going for democracy like it is in the West, they had their own idea, but unfortunately they failed. But maybe you will be successful. But Belarus, what's Victoria? What's your vision?
Thank you. That's a very complex question. So I think the vision of all Belarusians right now is actually to get back our basic human rights, stop the violence, and finally knock down the dictator. Because we don't have it, so it's very hard to say what kind of a political system, economic system we want to build. But it definitely should be free and independent, probably parliamentary system. We Belarusian would not stand having centralized system anymore. We had our experience. We are done with it. Definitely scenario of development, I think, in Belarus will highly depend on the defeat of Russia. And it will be a victory also for Belarus hugely, because we see there is a domino effect. If you hit Kremlin regime, you hit Lukashenko regime. Right now, it's what we see economically, right? That like once the sanctions never worked unless Russian economy, went down, then Belarusian followed. And the same is also happening right now in terms of like, that Zelensky made an ultimatum and like Lukashenko just followed because, Moscow is on fire. That's scary. Yeah, so definitely we are standing there for Ukraine, for victory. A lot of Belarusians, volunteers, fighters are there in Ukraine fighting. Yeah, and another scenario is basically this path, so-called path offered by Americans to normalization, basically going back to the status quo before 2020, when, Lukashenko is still in power, but he kind of tolerates like existence of civil society, and, you won't be arrested for a comment online probably, and other things like that. Which is not optimal, I guess, for many people who are, not like very committed freedom fighters. It's still better scenarios than now, but at the same time, I think a lot of people are not able to forgive and forget after all the victims, after all the pain and everything we went through. And 2020, I think it's also unforgettable. It was a turning point for Belarusian society that changed minds of hundreds of millions, actually, I would say. And also, I think the strong point of the process in Belarus in 2020 was the fact that they were decentralized, completely decentralized. And actually, all the political leaders in summer, they were arrested already. And their wives, stood up. But in general, like all people, again, they were having one vision, and this is what connected, one goal, not leaders, definitely not leaders.
Some people in the West, maybe that is also some sort of an arrogance, think that many of the resistant movements are movements by an elite, intellectual elite, maybe some also business elite, anyway, not really connected to the ordinary citizens' bread and butter. They think about human rights and other issues. Maybe, Daniel, you can explain, and then we can come back, how you see the relationship between the resistance movements and ordinary citizens. When and under what conditions can resistance movements normally start with some sort of an elite, bourgeois, whatever? How can they connect with the ordinary citizens? How can they convince ordinary citizens to participate? Is there a rule? Is there some conditions? In some countries, it seems to work a bit, at least in Serbia for some time. We have now a broader coalition, not only students. Still people speak about the students' revolution or students' resistance. But how can these students, maybe also in Myanmar and in other, how they can convince also ordinary citizens to participate in resistance against dictatorial regimes?
Tough one. First, who are ordinary citizens? I'm not sure there's such a thing. Everyone is unique in their own way. Of course, I think there is something natural that particularly young people, and then people who have higher or more education have always been more kind of critical towards kind of what their societies look like, and I think that has been throughout human history. I don't think that has been any different. But and certainly there's, because of that also we often see like an urban rural divide, no? Because a lot of people who are socio-economically more wealthy and more educated and younger move to the cities. I think we can also not divide the political and the economic so clearly. No? I think a lot of these issues that people are fighting for, that are dissatisfied, are bread and butter issues. People want kind of to have a better future for their children and for, also themselves, of course. And we often see that kind of these nonviolent revolutions also take place when regimes are under economic pressure, when the economy is not working well, and so on. I think what is important, and what we have seen now, and I think what the students in Serbia, for example, did very well, was to build this broad-based coalition, to really go to the villages by themselves, particularly as kind of modern regimes, they control, or also Magyar in Hungary in a way, if the regime controls the state media, censors the internet and the print media, so there's no way to get the message out. So I think resistance movements, they really need to kind of, go out there, go to small towns, go to villages, directly engage with people, not hope that kind of through some form of online campaign they will manage to kind of build a broad-based coalition. But I think it's generally about coalition building, and I think all of these kind of revolutions or attempts of revolution that we have seen, what we see then the pictures, if they succeed or are like this 100,000 or 500,000 people on the main square on Maidan or somewhere, but again, there's been like long years of work by a lot of people to kind of bring people together, to exchange ideas, and then to organize, to have people who look out for people who are injured, to have lawyers standing by when people are arrested. So caring for each other, I think, is also a very important part of these movements.
I mean, some people say that the closing down, the shutting down of internet was the measure done by Putin and the FSB, which mostly annoyed ordinary citizens, if I may use this expression, because they communicate very often via the digital communication was shut down, or at least partly shut down. Do you have information about that? Did you see that this was also seen by many citizens as really ugly and annoying in Russia?
Actually, yes. So Putin's ratings dropped at first time for a few years, for a lot of years, because like you said, ordinary people, they need internet, and this is the issue that connects everyone. But still, there is not a lot of connections between people. And they probably write something on the internet which you don't have access to. They speak to their, few friends, and it goes nowhere because there were no years of going to villages, speaking plainly to people, helping them solve their problems, rediscover their agency. I remember I live in Berlin, and I don't know if it happens everywhere, but in Berlin on New Year's Eve, there's a catastrophe. It's something horrible happens. A lot of fireworks, a lot of fire, a lot of broken cars, things like this. So you can imagine on the 1st of January, the whole city is like trashed. But in few days, it's clean. And why? Because I remember this year I was walking in my neighborhood on the 1st of January, and I saw my neighbors who are aufräumen. Sorry, I forget how. Yeah, clean up. They're cleaning up the streets, and they were everywhere because in every kids, in every neighborhood, people know each other, they speak to each other, they have trust, and they agreed to go to clean up on the 1st of January in every district. You will not see this in Russia, at least in many places. Some places has this kind of connections, some people connect to each other, but mostly they are not. And if something is trashed in Russia, this trash will lie on the street, and the people, ordinary people, will write letters to authorities. So authorities need to come to clean up this mess. But authorities will answer on the social media that people should clean up after themselves, and actually no one's clean up. They just talk about it. So,
Victoria?
I mean, in Berlin, there is a culture of neighborhood.
Victoria, how do you see that in Belarus? Is there a culture of neighborhood, or is it similar to Russia, to to more or less isolated, or did the resistance movement help to find some sort of a culture of neighborhood?
Yes, absolutely. There is a culture of neighborhood which played a very important role in Protest 2020, because this is how people actually connected. They were coming together in their courtyards, they were drinking tea, they were discussing politics, they were getting together, and then they were going together to the protest and doing activities together, events for children, for themselves, on a variety of topics. And this was beautiful. This also showed like how the society was, at one point, like people, understood that they are like a connected society that is also, helping each other, and we are one in our views and values, and we are ready to fight together, that they're not alone. Like this also really helped, because, it's scary to tell that you're against Lukashenko, right? But like you already have like a trusted neighborhood where you can share your views. So yes, absolutely.
Stefan, we've got a different situation in Ukraine and society, but we spoke about the kind of society. Now let's suppose there is an end of war, and let's hope it is very soon. There will be people living in Ukraine, having suffered under the war, and there are people outside Ukraine. Maybe they want to come back. And then some people would say, well, now you come back, the war is over, now you want to profit from the reconstruction. Do you expect some sort of, let's say, envy, hatred, conflict between those who stayed and those who were living outside and come back after the war? How can this neighborhood exist, or will it be more a conflictual neighborhood of people?
It's very looking into the future question. I think most of the people, they have the divided families. That part of the family lives in Ukraine, part of the family lives abroad, especially like overrepresented women and children. And I don't think that there will be very big criticism on behalf of those who stayed towards those who will return. Maybe even the opposite, because Ukraine will need more workforce, and now there is even a very small but still debate in Ukraine on whether Ukraine should allow immigrants from the third countries after the end of the war for the reconstruction purposes. And I'm pretty sure the majority of Ukrainians will say, okay, we would very better welcome our Ukrainians back than welcome citizens of the third countries that kind of also did not contribute to the war effort, but will be profiting from the reconstruction. Maybe the critical point can be that the Western governments of Ukraine may offer some stimulus packages to those returning to Ukraine, which may then raise the question, why did we suffer, did not get anything, and the people coming will get this money to come back to Ukraine. I may imagine this, but I don't think that Ukrainian government will be coming with such an initiative. That most likely will be European governments. And that may kind of a bit lessen the conflict. But
Last question I have to you is about Western support for resistance movement or sanctions, especially. how do sanctions help resistance movements? How is it negatively seen? Because there's the argument of those in power say, look, you are just fifth column of the West, and you are part of the enemy against our country. So the role of sanctions would be interesting. How you see that? Is it enough? Is it too much? Should it be rather reduced? How would you see it in general? Did you deal with this sanction question?
I can write books about that. Again, a vast topic. I mean, first, just Gene Sharp, who kind of developed the first methodology of civil resistance, sees kind of all kind of different sanctions as part of this toolbox of civil resistance. So definitely, it falls within. Yeah, just very broadly, I think what we have seen is that, so like economic sanctions that hit the whole population are often problematic in the way that they kind of, can be used by the regime to kind of build these enemy narratives that kind of, they can lead to solidarization with the regime in some cases, can be used, on the other hand, I think we've gotten a little bit better in more targeted sanctions, so kind of targeting parts of the elite or the military and the repressive apparatus, for example, or also oligarchs. I think that might have some effects. In the civil resistance theory, we have this idea of pillars. There's this concept of pillars of support. So the regime kind of, it's like a building or like a Greek temple, and it stands only because there's the military, there's the police, there's religious leaders, there's the economic leaders and so on, bureaucracy that support them. And if such a non-violent revolution should be successful, you need to pull away, weaken these pillars and ideally pull them to your side. And in some ways, I think some sanctions, if they are well thought through and targeted, might help to this group to reconsider their calculations. Or am I better off by supporting the regime, or actually does it make sense? Actually, do I have a better future if I kind of at least stay neutral or even kind of switch to the opposition? And we often see in these late stages of this non-violent revolution that kind of part of the police or part of the military then, stop supporting the regime and then they fall. So in that aspect, I think that sanctions can play a role. But again, I think it needs to be again locally led and the people need to kind of take their destiny into their hands. But I think also, aside from sanctions, support, also moral support and kind of speaking up for human rights, for democracy, what Western countries probably lately, I mean, given difficult situation with war and economic crisis and so on, of course, there are a lot of different priorities, but I think the voices of the global north or global west, I don't know, however we want to frame it, has been a bit too silent in terms of kind of pushing for democratization, while the right-wing networks and the populist networks have supported each other quite well, and that's not a topic of discussion.
Emine, sanctions helpful, not?
Helpful, not.
Should they be kept for a longer time on Russia, even if the war stops?
When we speak about European support, do we mean only sanctions?
No, the sanctions is one of the elements of support or non-support, but tell what do you expect? What do you want from Europe?
What do I want from Europe? I want for Europe to share the common goal with us, which is to strengthen local capacities, not weaken them. And if we're speaking about this, sanction is not a point, because sanction is something which affects system, economic system, large kind of system, and it's actually hard to answer for me because I'm Russian, and I don't know if you know, but in the Russian opposition there is this point of view that sanctions doesn't work. They make it worse because ordinary people suffer and the Russian government not, because they find way to, I don't know, to some loopholes to avoid those sanctions. I am not supporter of this idea because it's the idea of bad Putin and good Russians, and this idea is no go. I don't know. No, really hard question.
Victoria.
Yes, so I would say that it's a hard question because what sanctions we're speaking about, right? I do support targeted sanction. I do support, and I think it's crucially important to have sanction on, for example, industry that is supporting Russian war machine in Belarus, because it's like directly connected to lives of Ukrainians and people in Ukraine. So I'm not like doubting this kind of sanctions. They should be there, and we should never ever even think about like lifting them. At this point, other sanctions. First of all, like again, like when we speak about the EU, the most ridiculous thing is that there are actually no sanction packages that were imposed on Belarus for violation of human rights. There were packages for hijacking Ryanair plane that was, directly affecting European citizens. There were sanctions again, a migration crisis and hybrid attacks, and plus sanction packages together with Russia, which tells a lot, right? Speaking about the useful or not useful for civic resistance, again, it's definitely very useful for civic resistance in Ukraine. I don't doubt that. But for Belarusians, unfortunately, it backfires a lot, like severely, because first of all, there are a lot of loopholes. The regimes, they are very professional in terms of how to, break through. That's first thing. The other thing that when we are targeting, cutting connection with Belarusian banks, we need to understand that a lot of human rights organization, a lot of support for Belarusian political prisoners and activists there is cut too. So it's a big issue actually for Belarusian human rights organization right now, sanctions. Because when they're providing support for the people inside, they're basically violating sanctions. What to do in this case, we don't know still. Another thing is that there are a lot of sanctions that are targeting not regime itself, but people of Belarus and even people who had to flee Belarus and people in exile. And, like this restrictions of visas, it is almost impossible to have, to get a visa for Belarusians. A lot of educational programs in European Union and broader Europe has been cut. So these sanctions, they are actually pulling Belarus closer to Russia, because basically they isolate not only the regime itself, but the people inside. And there are still 9 million that are basically hostages of the regime, that are against of the regime, and where young people should go for opportunities if Europe is closed. They go to Moscow. That's it. And Moscow is very generous in terms of scholarship. They're using this opportunity. Because they understand that now there is a vacant place that they can take over. So I would say that the sanctions need to be very, very delicately, developed, very targeted, and there should be also a mechanism of monitoring the loopholes and, covering them when there is a need. Thank you.
I'm here the moderator, but I agree with many of your arguments. I think the sanction regime of the European Union is not very, let's say, targeted, and it's a bit too easy to answer. Another sanction package. We have also an issue of European citizens who are sanctioned personally, which are doubtful. So I agree that it's another subject to deal with the question what kind of sanctions should be done and sanction regime. But thank you very much for your comments. But still, Stepan, Ukraine is not under sanction. But how do you see as an expert how important for Ukraine's success are the sanctions, And do you see also some elements where it could be more differentiated? And maybe also, how do you see a future relationship between Ukraine and a sanctioned Russia? Are sanctions preventing, because in someday there will be a cooperation between Ukraine or Ukrainians and some Russians. Are the sanctions already now preventing the peace or the pace towards peace, the way towards peace?
No, I would say they are accelerating it. Don't think that without economic pressure in Russia, Russians will be ready to negotiate in good faith. And sanctions are one aspect, and the second, like the project that the Ukrainian armed forces are carrying out now, is the attacks on the petroleum and oil-related infrastructure in Russia, also with the aim of creating more problems for the Russian economy. And basically, as we know from the history of the Soviet Union, it was the economic problems that triggered perestroika and then triggered the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I think maybe Belarus and Russia are two separate cases. And in case of Russia, like the crime of aggression and sanctions have to be linked to the substantive change of the Russian behavior on the international arena. With Belarus, I agree that has to be more nuanced, and the maybe main priority for now would be to stop Belarus from supporting the Russian war effort, which is contributing to the death of Ukrainians every day. And then, as we know, Lukashenko, throughout his political career, maneuvering between the West and East, maybe this can be also used in that respect. And as regards the EU sanctions, there is more issue of how these sanctions have been implemented and how effective they are in the end, and how the EU countries are actually combating the circumvention of sanctions. And there is still a lot of things can be done, like now with UK, France finally starting prosecuting oil tankers that violate the sanctions regime. So there is still a lot to do, and I think from Ukraine's perspective, it has to be done, and it has to be done in a more rigorous way.
Thank you very much. I must apologize that I did not interrupt after 1 hour for taking questions, but still, if there are 2 or 3 urgent questions, we can take it now. And then, of course, if some of you want to add something, you're, of course, eager, or you're invited to add something. Is there any question you want to ask now? Please, yes.
Because we were talking about civil resistance, I want to bring the question to the question of a very effective form of civil resistance. As a man in an authoritarian country, I think it's one of the best things to just desert. But also, often the line is not that clear at what point this is a morally or just thing to do. So I wanted to hear your point, for example, how much authoritarian, or what would have to go wrong with Ukraine, for example, that it would be more understandable if people or more people would desert.
So it's about deserting from the army, or yeah, okay. Yeah, please.
The question is, deserting can be considered a civil resistance?
Yeah. Under what conditions?
Under what conditions? Well, we have quite a clear dichotomy in Russia and Ukraine, and like evading draft in Russia is obviously, I would say, an act of civil resistance. Avoiding draft in Ukraine is a more nuanced, given that we are a victim of an armed aggression, and the constitution of Ukraine says that the defense of Ukraine is a responsibility of every citizen, and basically all of our draft legislation is based around that idea, and that's kind of considered an obligation, and that's why if people evade it, they are prosecuted according to the Ukrainian legislation.
Actually, I didn't understand the question. Can you maybe rephrase?
If the citation from the army, resist is a form of resistance and justified resistance to say, no, I'm leaving the country because I don't want to be put into the army.
Yeah, well, in case of Russia, that works. In case of Ukraine, obviously not.
Yeah, we had in Austria a long discussion about a monument which was dedicated to the people who deserted from the Nazi army. People said, well, you shouldn't have a monument for that because desertion is it's illegal and it's a wrong case. But at the end, we have right in the center, opposite of the Prime Minister's office and the President's office, we have a monument in honor of people who deserted from the Nazi army. So it was finally recognized, but it was a debate. You wanted to add?
Just, very briefly, I think, there is kind of one strain, of course, within this whole also historical tradition of civil resistance, which is kind of pacifism, no? Also Bertrand Russell already in the First World War and so on and so on. Also, quite some authors who say, okay, we should actually not do military defense, but should do only non-violent defense. And also at the beginning, there were some papers or some interesting studies about, like in the early days of the Russian invasion, a lot of Ukrainian citizens also non-violently resisted by standing in front of tanks or not cooperating with the occupation authorities and so on and so on. And many of them were killed, arrested and so on and so on. So there are different ways to resistance. The question is, if you are, again, in a war that is illegal against international law and so on, I think desertion might even be a moral duty for some soldiers. Of course, it comes with a lot of personal risks, so I also understand that not everybody is doing it. But there's a question that remains, even like kind of if you are attacked, should we accept that there are some parts of the population who really have strong moral kind of reasons not to fight? Maybe there might be other ways for them to support the country, rather than kind of in a fighting capacity, for example.
Emini, you wanted to say something? No? Everything okay? Everything, Victoria, Stepan? So, there's still one question that lady we have to take. Sorry. But that's the last one.
Yeah, it was for the Russian lady. I forget her name, but I just understood that you don't appreciate or you don't think that a good leader, let's say Alexei Navalny, I read his book. I'm also Romanian. I was small when the communism was done, and I know how much we suffer still after 36 years from this let's say, non-democratic regime, and we have so many people in power. My question is, because you believe in small communities, I live myself in Canada, I've met nice Russian people who emigrate outside. If you believe only that people could do the change, let's say we all hope that Putin regime will go away or he will die soon, at least what I hope. Because he inflicted lots of loss for your country. I think it's more than 1 million people who passed away. And so do you see a possible another leader that maybe is outside in exile that could lead the country, or otherwise what you see as a future, let's say, or is still someone from the Putin surrounding? Because otherwise I don't see changes. I don't see how Russia could be a democratical country that could be again with Europe or with democratical, because only people in small community cannot do the change. I see this in Romania. You need good leader, you need people who are implementing changes, and Navalny was doing that. And so many others that he was killed. Do you see any other potential leader or maybe people who uprise against this regime, like revolution or something?
Thank you for your question. Very interesting question. I'm talking about communities because I am supporter of the bottom-up approach. Eventually, there will be leaders, and I work with communities on daily basis inside Russia, and I see leaders there. They can go to politics someday, but I don't think if, let's say, Putin dies tomorrow, and some kind of new leader emerges, I think that in 10 years we will invade Ukraine again because it's a history repeating itself. Because Russia has a long history of violence, of oppression, of imperial legacies, and we need to overcome this, to work this through, so people can build freedom society. Right now, me personally, I don't believe in this. Someone says that, yeah, we have, let's say, a few leaders, Ilya Yashin, Mikhail Khodorkovsky. They seems nice, but I'm not sure about them if some of them will become president of Russia, and I'm afraid that in 10 years it will be the same.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
I can add from my side because you said that maybe you have a leader in exile that can lead the country. It is impossible to lead a country from exile. I'm sorry. Unfortunately, all our leaders in exile, they have no power over what is going on inside of our countries, as well as they are after, for example, in case of Belarus, 6 years, they are very disconnected with society inside the country. And what we're trying to say, we're not against the leaders per se, but, the community should form an elected leader, not vice versa, that leader is kind of charismatic leader will appear and create society. And I think it's also very, you can see also this problem with centralized leadership within Belarusian opposition structures, because right now they're a little bit mimicking, the former systems that is built in Belarus by the regime, because, unfortunately, humans are humans. They get corrupt by the power, by the fame, and etc. And this is a big problem, and that we are facing. That you can never ever, I think, give a single power to one person or a group person. It's definitely to be decentralized.
Thank you. It's interesting, just to make a last comment, that in Albania now, the part of the opposition of the resistance movement also proposes a similar concept of having to overcome the division between different political parties and the election, to have some sort of an assembly of direct chosen people. It comes again and again. I'm still doubtful that it will be a result, but maybe it's an element of, let's say, changing the rigid structure we normally have. But still, unfortunately, I think some leaders will be necessary to have the change. Maybe also leaders, of course, and hopefully leaders who are different from Mr. Putin, very much different from Mr. Putin. Thank you very much for participation. It was hot, at least outside. We didn't agree on everything. That's good, because that's democracy. And thank you for coming. Thank you for listening and being so patient and staying here. And now you have some cool drinks outside. Some cocktails, I think, even will be mixed. Anyway, please stay and enjoy the evening, even when the official discussion is closed, but informal discussions can, of course, continue. Thank you very much, especially you on the podium, for your contributions. Thank you.